Welcome to Med Talks, a place for mentorship, education, and development. Inspired by early careerists eager to learn from the knowledge and experiences of their preceptors, Med Talks was created as a professional development platform where UF health preceptors can share their stories with the next generation of healthcare leaders. Each month we will hear from a different leader on topics ranging from technical tips and tricks to life lessons and growth opportunities that have made them the leaders they are today. Think of Med Talks as a place where leaders can share all the things their younger selves needed to know. During this time, we invite you to ask questions and learn as our leaders share what motivates and drives them to success.
For those who don't know, we will be hearing from Scott Sumner, CFO of the College of Medicine. Just to give you some brief background on him, he has an undergrad at UF. He also earned his MBA here. Go Gators. And he held different administrative roles throughout the health system. He then went on to work in Vermont for a little bit, and then he worked in Texas. He was part of the inaugural sort of really administrative structure, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vice President of Administration? Or
Yeah, let's go with that.
At UCF, so he was part of that. At that point, there hadn't been a new College of Medicine for a long time. So today we're hearing from someone who's been in healthcare for a long time. And for those of you who don't know, after his tenure at UCF, he came back and he was in the Department of Anesthesiology for a good bit, and that's where he created M500. So Scott's always been this teacher, this coach, this mentor, and he always stressed personal and professional growth. And so today's really a segue of all of that, really teaching us about emotional intelligence. And without further ado, I'll let Scott kind of take that.
Thanks, maybe as a place to start, my experience at UCF, starting a brand new medical school, one had been started in I think about 25 years in the country. You did not get a playbook about how to open a medical school, so you talk about kind of flying by the seat of your pants. That's exactly what that was like for about 6 years to get to full accreditation. And I learned a lot about myself, some good, mostly not good, related to my own professional behaviors. And some of that is incorporated in what we're going to talk about today. I assume many of you have heard of emotional intelligence. Yeah. And people will often reference, a skill set around emotional intelligence, and I'm usually suspect when I hear that, because it's way easier said than done. And then it takes time to work on that, and I have kind of formed the belief that I'll never be done in developing my own emotional intelligence. I'll never be done growing and developing, and I don't want to be done growing and developing, because I think at that point I'm done. So I don't remember exactly what the topical request was, but when I sat down to talk about this with Juan, this is the first place that I went. I will tell you this is maybe not even somewhat refreshed slide deck from a healthcare leadership series I did for the MHA program back in 2019, which just tells me how quickly time passes, because that seems like it was last year. So it's still all relevant stuff, and I'll probably read quite a bit what's on the slides and then add some commentary to it. And then I'll try to get it done in about 15 minutes, so there's some time for questions. Sound like a plan? So first I want to talk about just the first set of slides are tools for your toolbox. So these are things that you should want in your toolbox and should be working on. I'm a big fan of understanding your amygdala. Your amygdala is part of your limbic system, and it's part of your fear, flight, fight part of your brain, and it's the emotion center of your brain. So we have a term in coaching called an amygdala hijack. That's when something has triggered you, and you're in your amygdala, and all of your responses are going to be emotional. You are not in your neocortex, your logical brain. And typically you know when that's happening because viscerally your body's telling you that that's going on if you know to pay attention to it. Amygdala is from Greek to Latin, and it translates to almond. Do you know why it translates to almond? Katie knows. Because the shape of the amygdala is the shape of an almond. It looks like an almond. There's actually two of them. If you want to know where they are, you just point a finger this way and one in each eye, and where those lines intersect is where the amygdala is. So there's two of them that sit in your brain. It drives a lot of the emotions, and when we tend to act out and do things we would rather not do, that's what causes it. So we talk about amygdala hijacking. So you'll hear me talk a little bit about triggers. So those are things that are going to show up in your environment that cause you to move to your amygdala. So there's a stimulus that shows up, a trigger. So for me, it might be something like a double standard. Right? I feel like if there are a set of rules for everybody, including me, and somebody else does not abide by the same set of rules, that I get a little incongruent around that. Right? And in the past, I've acted out in a way that I wish I wouldn't. So that stimulus shows up, and it's got two pathways to travel in your brain. The preferred way is through the thalamus to your neocortex, your logical brain. But often what happens when that trigger shows up is it takes a shortcut and goes straight to your amygdala. And like I said, at that point, it's all an emotion-based response. And typically you're going to know it because you feel flush in the face, your voice gets elevated, your body language will show that you're agitated. You'll have some sense that that's going on if you pay attention to, viscerally what your body is telling you. I love this one. I love the last one because this is what we all do now. We just kind of walk around like that. Even though as leaders, we try not to do that. This is kind of the evolution of the human species. Shouldn't be too unfamiliar to you. But a way to break that down, bottom left, we'll start with our reptilian brain, or what's considered the instinctive brain. So that would be the front end of the graphic at the top. Right, when we started to evolve from primates into humans and essentially had a brainstem. So what takes place there, this is all about territory, social dominance, fight or flight, wired for danger, and therefore we tend to have negative emotions. We're happy when we are safe from danger, and the evolutionary role there is the selfish brain, right? It's intended to help you survive. Right, so think back like in the cave days, right? That's how they would survive, was almost instinctively by emotion. Then we evolved to the mammalian or feeling brain. So this is the limbic system, like I talked about. It's responsible for emotions, learning, memory, and spirituality. We are happy when we feel trust, social bonds, and higher status. So this is the beginning of formation of community in the evolution of humans. And its evolutionary role is a social brain that helps the community to survive, right? It's about protecting each other, providing a safe environment. And then we go to the primate or thinking brain. This is the neocortex, right? So moving from the feeling brain, amygdala, to the neocortex. Sensory perception, spatial reasoning, motor commands, conscious thought, intellectual memory. So we're happy when we're learning. Anticipating future rewards, connected to a higher purpose, and kind of in flow, right? Doing things that are meaningful for us. And our evolutionary role is a predicting brain that helps the community to survive, right? So keep that part in mind, right? Because it is easy for us to fall back to more of the feeling brain when we have an emotional reaction. So now I'm going to go to Maslow's hierarchy of need. Have you guys heard of that before? And this is like fundamental psychology. So the first two, psychological needs, is kind of the primitive brain, like we talked about. Food, water, warmth, rest, the essentials for survival, followed by safety needs, right? Building community around you. And then a belongingness and love. So now we're moving more into the emotional brain. And ultimately, self-esteem or esteem needs, right? Prestige, feeling of accomplishment, and ultimately self-realization, self-actualization, achieving one's full potential. Now we're getting more towards the thinking brain, right? So far, so good. So that's important to kind of connect those two together, right? There's some basis scientifically around how the hierarchy needs plays out in our social environment and for each of us as individuals. Anybody done a DISC assessment? Tongue in cheek. I bring that up because it is, one, it's a fundamental tool in my mind. Communication is a behavior. The better you understand your own communication style and the style of others, the more you're successful you're going to be in accomplishing your goals. And a big part of kind of knowing what your communication style is and how things like your values show up day to day. We all have a set of values that we bring to work every day. A lot of them we learned growing up. They change over time, but they tend to be pretty consistent. So sometimes what happens in our environment is somebody will say something to us that is in conflict with our values, our individual values. They didn't necessarily mean that as an affront to you, but often it is a trigger for our emotional reaction, and we end up doing things we would prefer not to do. For me, I mentioned one example around kind of a double standard. One very visible memory for me, meaning I can see it and think it at the same time, was when I was at UCF building a new medical school. We had a leadership team, and I would be in a discussion with the dean about money we did not have, right, and try to take a position on that. Nobody else at the table would say a word, but they would come to me afterwards behind a closed door to tell me they agreed with me. I just find that completely unhelpful, right? So over time, when nobody else says anything, I then have a verbal vomit at the table because now I've had enough, and I end up acting in a way that is unproductive. I have a very specific memory of that, where I kind of just vomited all over the table, right? Because I had not said things that were on my mind until I couldn't take any more, and then it all comes out. And I had one of my colleagues come up to me afterwards, one of the other associate deans, to say to me, "Right message, Scott, wrong delivery." And he was absolutely right. I've done that before in my career. I've done a howler by email. You know what a howler is? Harry Potter, right? And then when you read it, it just yells at you. I knew the moment after I sent it, it was a mistake because I had revised it 4 times. That should have been my cue that I should walk away from it. And what I ended up doing the next day, I got called by my peer because it was one of his employees that I howled at. He was like, "Oh, that was really kind of harsh, Scott." And he was right. And I went back to that individual and apologized in person. And then I circled back to the email that I copied God and Country on. And I told everybody else the same thing, right? I kind of closed the loop. So if that ever happens to you guys and you end up apologizing to somebody from something that happened in a group, you owe the same thing to the group because the rest of them don't know that you did that, and it's important for your own reputation. So values play a big role in what happens every day. So it's something to keep in mind. We don't all have the same exact values. The other thing to keep in mind around communication is we all are going to interpret the conversation in our own way, right? So I'm having a conversation with Emma. She's going to say 10 sentences to me. I'm going to pick out 5 words from those sentences. I'm going to apply my meaning to those words, and from that I'm going to interpret what she said, whether it's accurate or not, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind as you think about your own communication style and where things have an opportunity to go wrong in your communication with your peers, with your superiors, or people that report to you. Everybody with me? A few books that you might want to consider. This isn't the end-all be-all, but they are certainly relevant to this conversation and why it matters. Some of you are familiar with Driven, Simon Sinek. If you haven't heard him, I listen to him often. He's got some good stuff. It's all about kind of what internally drives us, which is something for all of you to figure out. I'll give you an example. When I work with people and we try to work on, kind of what's your why it matters or what drives you or what, start with why, I'll get something like, my why it matters is to help others. And my response back to that is that's the outcome of your why it matters. So what comes before that, right, that is really what drives you. It is not that easy to figure out, and it takes some time. So it's something to be very purposeful about, especially now in your career, to start to understand about your own self and how you're wired. In particular, around Driven, it's by Doug Brackman. I did not include that. This is about mastering your gifts, in particular, things around self-sabotage. Anybody do that? Yeah, me too. Shame and doubt, and actually starts to incorporate meditation, mindfulness, things of that nature that are important to kind of being whole and centered as you grow and become a mature professional, I guess I would say. Emotional agility, triggers, untethered soul. These are kind of 3 of my favorites. I've actually met all 3 of these authors. On the left, Marshall Goldsmith is the father, maybe grandfather of executive coaching. He's been doing it for many decades. This is his second book, and it's just like it says, triggers. It's what in your environment causes you to do things you wish you would not do. Incidentally, he coaches like Fortune 500 CEOs, World Bank CEOs. He charges about $250K a client. So he's got game. Emotional Agility by Susan David, also a really great book, all about emotions and how you manage that in your environment. And I'm going to have a next slide that touches on that. Untethered Soul, to me, is required reading. Mickey Singer actually lives in Gainesville, Florida. Used to be the CEO of WebMD. Has a very interesting background, and is the benefactor to UF Health for the first stroke ambulance. Because he suffered from a stroke, and we saved him. Well, UF Health saved him, right? And that was his contribution back. In particular, a key about Untethered Soul is learning about your inner roommate. Is anybody familiar with their inner roommate? That voice that talks to you, that's critical of you, that thinks you can't, that will disagree with you, right? Until you agree with it, and then it will change its position. That's your inner roommate. So the whole concept there is, if that was really your roommate, would you live with them? You wouldn't, right? And so the first thing I'll do around your inner roommate is encourage you to give your inner roommate a name, because it helps to kind of objectify the voice, and you'll know better when that voice is talking. My inner roommate is Doubting Thomas, for all the reasons that I just described. He thinks I can't do things that I want to do, and he often gets in my way. He'll paralyze me, cause me to take, actions I would prefer not to do, or be critical of myself, not take action to move forward quickly. So those are really good readings. If you want a copy of Untethered Soul, all you have to do is ask me. I keep a stack at home. I pass them out like candy. So back to Susan David. We talk about emotions. I find this one interesting because you might interpret that somebody is angry, by example, but these are other examples of things that are like angry as emotions. So it just gives you a more detailed list of the types of emotions that would show up, either for you or others in the environment. When Juan and I reviewed this slide deck, this seemed to be pretty meaningful for him, that he got a deeper look and understanding of what might be considered embarrassment, right? Or how embarrassment as an emotion shows up in the environment. So a helpful list to pay attention to, and as you might guess, it leads us straight to emotional intelligence. So 4 components to emotional intelligence, certainly self-awareness, which is a lot of what we're talking about today. Self-management, we're also going to talk about how you control your emotions. Those two go together. How you adapt in your environment, having an achievement orientation, and having a positive outlook. I'll tell you, that's a challenge the more you grow in leadership, to maintain consistently a positive outlook, because there's a lot of stuff that comes your way that you have to juggle day in and day out. You've got a lot of personalities in the environment that you're managing, and it can be a challenge to keep a positive outlook. Social awareness, empathy, and organizational awareness. So as we think about the kind of work that we do, the size of our organizations, organizational awareness becomes particularly important. And then a lot around relationship management. It's one thing to establish a relationship, build a relationship. You then have an obligation to manage the relationship. And that takes time and effort. So influence, coaching, and mentoring should be an essential for all of you. Kind of doesn't matter to me where you are in your career. You got to get comfortable with conflict management. That is way easier said than done. And in my experience, it is where managers struggle the most, is to either manage conflict or to give difficult feedback. Teamwork is also part of relationship management, and having some form of inspiration as part of your style and what you do day in and day out. This is kind of going to be really, I'll call it technical, around emotional intelligence. This is scientific findings, right? This is not stuff that's made up. There's a lot more that has evolved since then about, a connection between the brain and the heart and vice versa. The brain and the heart, they talk to each other, believe it or not. They send each other signals, and there are tricks to manage that. You probably have heard about social and emotional learning. It's pretty common, especially in curriculum in preschool, middle school, maybe high school. The concept of neuroplasticity. So people used to think that the brain stopped growing about your mid-20s. So you're about done with your brain now. It's baked fully. The truth is, it has the ability to continue to grow, right? It's plastic, it can evolve if you are willing to put time and effort into that. And that the whole kind of premise around emotional intelligence was what separates CEOs from the rest of the C-suite. And so they studied this at Harvard. Right, all of them have a set of technical skills that got them to the C-suite. What distinguishes the CEO from the rest of the C-suite is the ability around emotional intelligence. So clearly, CEOs are hired for their intellect and business expertise, and they're typically fired for their lack of emotional intelligence. Not typically, but nonetheless fired for their emotional intelligence. I love this one, and I think this kind of sums it all up. Anyone can be angry, that's easy, but to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. Right, so it just gives you a sense of when anger shows up, it is a really heavy emotion to figure out how to manage as an individual, because all of that context is true. I don't know that there's a specific right way to do that. It's just something to keep in mind. Note who this comes from, right? Aristotle, I don't even know what century that was, right? But this is not new stuff. They knew this back in the time of Middle Ages, Rome, Greece. They were already talking about these things. Impulse is the medium of emotion. Those that are at the mercy of impulse, who lack self-control, suffer a moral deficiency. So the ability to control impulse is the base of will and character. The root of altruism lies in empathy, the ability to read emotions in others, lacking a sense of another's need or despair, where there is no caring. If you pay attention to the people that you work with, you will get a sense by their body language where they are in a conversation. We all have tells. Katie, do I have a tell? What's my tell? Yeah, I rub my head. When do I rub my head?
When you're stressed.
When I am stressed. How did I learn that that is a tell? Because my staff told me that. We were in a meeting one day and they're like, oh no, he's stressed. I'm like, how do you know I'm stressed? They're like, you're rubbing your head, Scott. Then I learned it's actually a soothing technique for babies. Right? So I drew the conclusion my mom must have rubbed my head a lot as a kid. Not exactly sure why. Let's see, self-restraint and compassion are two imperative moral stances. So moral relating to beliefs about what is right or wrong, values, and behaving in a way that is believed by most people to be good and right. So I'm going to go to the middle bullet. Understanding the interplay of brain structures that rule our moments of rage and fear, passion and joy, as well as what we can do to subdue or be more constructive or destructive around our emotional impulses. And what neurological data suggests there's a window of opportunity to do this, not so much around shaping our children's emotional habits, but for us as adults. So part of this that Juan and I talked about is, when you sense that you have a trigger that has shown up, right, you've got a magic moment to decide how you want to manage it. And it's a nanosecond. It does not take long. Taking a breath or two, when the trigger shows up and you're moving to your amygdala, your brain's going to send a message to your heart to speed up. Why? Fear, fight, flight. You're getting ready to take some action. There is data that shows this by EKG. If you take 2 or 3 breaths, the heart sends a message back to the brain that says, I've got it under control. And suddenly you can be in a place where you can have the conversation that you want to have. It's that kind of simple practice. Breathing is important, right, in terms of managing our own composure day in and day out. Let's see. The second bullet, automatic reactions have become etched in our nervous system. So this is kind of our primordial history, right? We're wired to have certain reactions, and they're often involuntary, right? So the more you pay attention to the things that cause you to have those reactions, the more you learn the trigger, and then you can begin to manage your reaction to the circumstances. I will tell you, I've not mastered this. I'm going to come back to my earlier comments. This is, to me, lifelong work. Everybody's different, right? Different kind of triggers are going to show up masked as something different that you're not familiar with, but at the base of it, it's the same trigger, right? So like an example for me where, you've got one set of rules, but there's a different set of rules for me, and that's going to get me sideways. Yeah, I love this. In terms of biological design for the basic neural circuitry of emotion, what we were born with is what worked best 50,000 human generations ago. Not the last 500 generations, and certainly not the last 5, right? It is that kind of innate in every single one of us. It's part of our fundamental humanness. All emotions are, in essence, impulses to act, the instant plans for handling life that evolution has instilled in us. So the very root of the word emotion is Latin for to move. When you put an E in front of that, means to move away, which suggests our tendency implicitly with every emotion is to move away from it, right? Instead of kind of embracing it. I'm going to connect this to coaching because I use this a lot when I coach people. When there's work to do that is difficult work to do, you're going to know because your body's telling you if you pay attention to it. So for me, in my coaching experience, meaning when I've been coached, when my hands get sweaty, I know there's something difficult that I'm talking about, which means I'm going to have to figure out how to work through it. Our tendency as human beings is to kind of resist what I call the icky, right? Because that's what it is. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just icky stuff. But what you're looking for is on the other side of icky, which means you've got to work through those things to understand them, to kind of put them behind you and know how to manage them as you continue to move forward. Don't be afraid of the icky. I'm telling you, what you're looking for is on the other side of that. I know it by experience. Let's see. So neurological givens play out in the basic flair for living called emotional intelligence. So being able to rein in emotional impulses, to read another's innermost feelings, maybe not innermost feelings, right? But if you pay attention to the people you work with and have a sense of how they're wired, what their values are, what feels like success to them, right? You're going to better be able to read when it's not a good day for Katie, when it's not a good day for Juan. You're going to have a better sense of that, right? And know how to manage the relationship. Let's see. Yeah, I love this. We all like to maybe not all talk about IQ. IQ only contributes about 20% to success in life, right? The other 80% is related to other forces, and this is going to be one of them. And emotional aptitude is a meta-ability, so determining how well we can use other skills we have, including raw intellect, right? So not just raw intellect. Know thyself. When people come to me and say, hey, Scott, will you coach me? The first thing I do is I have a prompt. It's a mirror, a little compact mirror. And I hold it up in front of them and I say, until you can look in the mirror and know the things you do well, wear like a warm coat, and know the things that you know you need to improve on, I can't help you. You have to be willing to do that kind of work. That's the icky part, right? You have to be willing to step into that and work through it. So then the intrapersonal part of intelligence is the same thing as interpersonal, right? It's turning all of that internally and understanding the same things about ourselves and kind of how we're put together, how we're wired. It says at the beginning here, just so I can back up, right? Know thyself, a belligerent samurai. So this is the story of that. A belligerent samurai, an old Japanese tale goes, once challenged a Zen master to explain the concept of heaven and hell. The monk replied with scorn, you're nothing but a lout. I can't waste my time with the likes of you. His very honor attacked, the samurai flew into a rage, and pulling his sword from his scabbard, yelled, I could kill you for your impertinence. That, the monk calmly replied, is hell. Startled at seeing the truth in what the master pointed out about the fury that had him in its grip, the samurai calmed down, sheathed his sword, and bowed, thanking the monk for the insight. And that, said the monk, is heaven. The sudden awakening of the samurai to his own agitated state illustrates the crucial difference between being caught up in a feeling and becoming aware that you are being swept away by it. Socrates' injunction, know thyself, speaks to the keystone of emotional awareness of one's own feelings as they occur. Right? Again, a work in progress. It's not all that easy. These are the longest transitions. Let's see. How am I doing on time? I need to speed up. You guys have this in your slide deck. So let's do this. You don't have to do this now, but it will be worth you taking a few minutes and just rating yourself on these 13 signs of emotional intelligence. Scale of 1 to 10. Like you think about feelings. All right, just be purposeful about that. And you'll get some sense of where you already have some strengths around emotional intelligence and where you've got some opportunity for growth and development. Let's see. 4 ways good leaders achieve success. Leaders better their environment. They know their teams and themselves well. That's got some emotional intelligence associated with it. Leaders maintain a positive attitude, and leaders build the next generation of leaders. Principles to live by, at least in my mind. I love this one because some of what we've talked about is relationships. The most profound wealth is in relationships. You cannot buy yourself out of suffering or into meaning. Right, so be purposeful about building and developing your relationships and maintaining them. They will pay dividends for a long time. I've got people that are on my reference list that I could call today, and I know they'd be there for me. And that reference list goes back a long ways. People will talk about leadership and, how to become a leader. My general guidance is there's no one way to be a great leader. And so part of this is to encourage all of you to build your own leadership brand. What are the tools to put in your toolbox? They don't all have to be the same, right? My toolbox is not the same as others. What I have up here are things that have been effective for me in my career, and I'll encourage you to do the same thing, right? It's a purposeful study. If you want to be a leader in the future, it takes time and effort to understand what it means to be a leader, and clearly emotional intelligence is a big component of that. There's one I did not talk about that's on here, which is vulnerability. If you have not watched Brené Brown, you should watch Brené Brown, The Power of Vulnerability. I think we are socialized that vulnerability is a weakness in our culture. It's actually the basis of courage, right? So when your hands get sweaty, whatever that visceral reaction is that shows up for you, if you have a willingness to work through that icky, be vulnerable to explore what you need to do differently, what you need to change, it will get you where you want to be much quicker.